The wind tugged at the brim of Evelyn Harper's hat as she rode across the barren ridge, her father's horse trailing behind her with an empty saddle that spoke louder than any eulogy. The late afternoon sun bled orange over the horizon, casting long, tired shadows over the desert scrub and brittle mesquite trees. The ranch was just beyond the hill, but she wasn't in a hurry. Every hoofbeat on the dry earth was one step closer to a new life she didn't ask for. And yet, it was hers now. The weight of the funeral clung to her like dust in her throat. The preacher's words, hollow and rehearsed, still echoed in her ears. He was a good man, they'd said. Hard-working. Honest. But they didn't know him like she did. They didn't know how he used to hum when he mended fence wire, or the way he read aloud from the almanac by lantern light, even though she'd heard it all before. They didn't know how he smelled of saddle leather and pipe tobacco, and how he cried silently behind the barn the night her mother died. Evelyn's hands were raw from the reins, though she barely noticed. The ride from town had been long, but her thoughts had made it feel longer. She'd buried her father next to her mother on the hill behind the church, where the wind always seemed to whisper through the grass like it was carrying secrets. She left a single white rose, one she had to pay for with the last of her coin, and didn't wait to see if anyone else stayed to mourn. Most didn't. The ranch came into view as she crested the rise. It looked smaller than it did when she was a girl, as though grief had shrunk the land. The corrals were half empty, the barn door hung open, and one of the chimneys leaned slightly to the east like a crooked finger. But it was home. It always had been. She dismounted slowly, her knees aching more than she expected, and led both horses to the stable. The old mare whinnied from the far end of the corral, but otherwise the place was still. Evelyn rubbed the sweat from her brow with her sleeve and leaned against the post for a long moment. No one came out to greet her. Inside the house, the air smelled of dust and memory. A layer of silence clung to everything. The worn rug in the sitting room, the cracked photograph of her parents on the mantel, the half-empty whiskey bottle on the kitchen table. She sat in her father's old chair, the one with the split armrest and a permanent lean, and closed her eyes. The ticking of the wall clock filled the room, steady and cruel. She remembered being small, curled up in that chair with a blanket around her shoulders as her father stoked the fire. He'd tell her stories about the land, how their great-grandparents had tamed this wild place, how the soil remembered the blood and sweat it took to build a life here. He'd made her believe they were part of something bigger than themselves. Now, it was just her. The next morning, she dressed in the same dark riding clothes and rode into town. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that follows behind a storm but comes before the next one. Folks watched her from their porches, whispered behind half-closed shutters. A woman alone, dressed like a man, with no ring on her hand and no name to back her but the one that had just gone into the ground. They didn't bother to hide their stares. She tied her horse outside the town hall, took a deep breath and pushed through the heavy wooden doors. Inside, the air was thick, with the smell of ink, dust, and the sweat of tired men. 3 of them sat at the long table. Judge Ballantyne in the center, hat off and balding, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept well in weeks. Beside him was Mr. Dowser, the town treasurer, and finally Mr. Thorne, the banker. They didn't rise when she entered. They barely nodded. "Miss Harper," Ballantyne said, voice like gravel. "We were expecting you." Evelyn stood tall, hands clasped behind her back. "I'm here to settle the land deed. The ranch is mine now." Thorne leaned forward, his lips twitching into a mock smile. "That's the trouble, Miss Harper. It ain't that simple. You know the law." She knew. Territorial statute, old and cruel. Land can't pass to an unmarried woman without a male co-owner, kin, or husband. Her father had tried to repeal it more than once. Never succeeded. "The land is mine by blood," she said. "Blood don't make you a legal proprietor," Thorne said, shrugging. "Not here," Dowser cleared his throat. "You could challenge it, of course, take it to the circuit judge. Might win, but court costs ain't cheap." "And how long would it take?" she asked. Ballantyne shook his head. "Too long. The ranch is in arrears. If it ain't producing by next quarter, the bank can reclaim it." Thorne folded his hands smugly. There's a way, though. A marriage license would secure the deed. 30 days. That's what the law allows. Evelyn's mouth was dry. Her eyes burned, not with tears but with fury. You're telling me I've got a month to find a husband, or I lose everything? That's right, Valentine said. We're giving you time out of respect for your father. Thorne's smile deepened. Of course, if you're looking for a suitable candidate, I'm sure I could make arrangements. I have a cousin. She turned without a word and walked out. Behind her, the door slammed so hard the glass rattled in the frame. She didn't ride straight home. Instead, she stopped at the edge of town, near the livery, and stared at the old saloon sign swinging in the wind. The ranch hands gathered there at night. Some played cards. Others drank until dawn. Most didn't expect her to last the year. A few had told her so to her face. Back at the ranch, the tension was visible. Fewer men at the barn. Quiet stares at breakfast. Whispers that stopped when she entered a room. By sundown, 2 of them had packed their bedrolls and ridden off. No goodbyes. Evelyn stood alone in the barn, brushing down her father's horse, when one of the older men, Jed, approached her. You really gonna try to run this place alone, Miss Evelyn? She kept brushing. I'm not alone. Jed shifted his weight. Ain't my place to say, but men don't like taking orders from a woman. You'd be better off selling now. Maybe find a smaller place, quieter. She paused, then looked him in the eye. This land raised me, taught me to ride, to bleed, to bury my own kin. I'm not selling, and if any man's got a problem with me being in charge, he can do what the others did and ride out. Jed nodded slowly. You're your father's girl, all right. When he left, she didn't move for a long time. The sun had dropped behind the hills, casting the barn in deep shadow, but she could still see the dust particles dancing in the last golden rays. That night, she sat on the porch with a flask in her hand and a shotgun across her knees. The stars above were cold and sharp, like the edge of truth. Her boots were scuffed, her hands blistered, and her heart heavy, but she didn't blink. She stared out across the dark fields, across the fences and the windmill and the herd they still had left, and whispered into the night. I will not let this ranch die. Rain rolled off the edge of the saloon roof, making a soft percussion on the wooden porch where Evelyn Harper stood with her collar turned up. The sky had broken open sometime in the night, and by dawn the streets of Clay Ridge were mud-slicked and ankle-deep in silence. Her boots sank with every step as she walked toward the boarding house, the one with the faded curtains and the rusted bell that hadn't rung properly in years. Inside, the parlor was dim and sour, with the smell of wet wool and cigar ash. A thin woman with spectacles perched on her nose glanced up from her knitting. "Mornin', Miss Harper," she said, voice flat. Evelyn nodded once. "He's still here?" "Room 3, upstairs. Been quiet since he arrived. Paid for a week in advance, if you can believe it." Evelyn didn't respond. She stepped past the parlor, boots heavy on the worn steps, and paused in front of the door marked with a crooked number 3. She raised her fist to knock, hesitated, then rapped twice. A long silence. Then footsteps. The door opened a few inches, revealing sharp eyes and a day's worth of stubble on a face too young to be so cold. "You're the rancher," he said, not a question. "You're the one who answered my notice," she replied. The man stepped back and opened the door wider. She stepped inside, brushing the water from her coat. The room was simple. A small bed, a travel bag, a shotgun propped in the corner. No personal items, no pictures, just the man and the silence that followed him. "I'm Evelyn Harper," she said. He nodded. "Garrett Boone." She studied him. He didn't flinch under her gaze. His eyes were pale gray, almost silver, like they'd been washed out from too much seeing. His coat was military issue, the edges frayed. His boots were worn but polished, clean, disciplined. "You said in your letter you were looking for legal work. This is what I'm offering. Marriage, in name only, no expectations, just a signature to keep the land." Garrett folded his arms. Why me? I don't want a husband. I want a witness. A name beside mine, on a piece of paper. You don't ask questions, I don't tell lies. In exchange, I give you a roof, a meal, and a cut of the profits if there's anything left come winter. Garrett watched her. You don't want a man with a reputation? I don't want a man with intentions. Fair enough. A pause hung between them. You were Union? She asked. 3rd Cavalry. Virginia front. Still carry a weapon? Every day. Would you use it to defend what's mine? If I'm paid. Evelyn nodded. We marry tomorrow. Justice of the peace opens at 10. Garrett picked up his hat from the bedpost. Then I suppose I'll need a suit. The rain didn't stop. It kept falling, soft and steady, like the world was trying to wash away the sins of the past and finding the stain too deep. They met at the courthouse steps the next morning. Garrett wore a black coat and a silver tie that didn't quite match. Evelyn wore the same riding dress she'd worn to bury her father. Inside, the justice spoke the words with the same tone he used when sentencing drunks. There were no vows, no kiss, just signatures on a form, the scratch of pen against paper, and a handshake that held no affection. You can ride with me or meet me there, she said outside. I'll follow, Garrett answered. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Garrett didn't speak, didn't ask about the land or the men who worked it. He just rode. Straight-backed and still, as if each mile was measured and precise. Evelyn stole glances at him once or twice, searching for cracks in the armor. She found none. When they arrived, the ranch hands looked up from their work and stared. One of them, a wiry man named Clay, spat into the dirt and muttered something to his friend. Evelyn dismounted first, handed the reins to a stable boy, and turned to Garrett. You'll sleep in the bunkhouse, she said. Meals are at dawn and dusk. Work starts before the sun does. You want pay, you pull weight. Garrett gave a small nod. Understood. That night, Evelyn sat alone in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold. The house felt emptier now, not because of who was gone, but because of who was there. A stranger, sharing her name. A man who didn't ask for anything and gave even less. She thought it might be easier that way. Clean. Simple. But nothing about the ranch had ever been simple. By the end of the week, the whispers started. One man left without a word. Another stopped showing up to meals. Clay cornered her near the tool shed, arms crossed and jaw tight. We didn't sign up to work for some fella you plucked off the street, he said. You marry a gun hand. Folks'll think we're running a gang, not a ranch. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice ice. You didn't sign up for anything but wages. You want to earn them, you stay. You got a problem with me, you leave. Clay narrowed his eyes. He's bad news. I seen his kind before. Then you know he's the kind that doesn't scare easy. Evelyn walked away without waiting for a reply. That night she found Garrett outside the barn, oiling the lever of his rifle beneath the lantern light. You planning on staying? She asked. Garrett didn't look up. That depends. On what? Whether or not you're serious about keeping this place. I was born serious. He gave a quiet chuckle. Then I'll stay, long as you don't expect me to pretend. I don't expect anything from you. Good. They stood in silence. The night was cool, the stars sharp. Somewhere, a coyote howled. I need this place, she said, more to herself than to him. It's all I've got left. Garrett finally looked at her, eyes unreadable. Then, let's make sure you keep it. The next morning, they worked together for the first time. Garrett repaired a broken fence near the southern pasture, while Evelyn checked the water lines. Their movements were efficient, separate, but gradually began to align. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was useful. When a steer went lame, he splinted it with care. When a tool broke, he fixed it without being asked. By week's end, a rhythm had formed. Still, not everyone was pleased. One night, she overheard Clay, again, talking to one of the remaining hands near the barn. She thinks just 'cause she's got a man now, she's in charge. He ain't even local. No one knows where he came from. Maybe that's the point, the other replied. Maybe he don't owe nothing to nobody. You ever think maybe that makes him dangerous? Evelyn stepped into the light, boots loud against the dirt. If anyone's dangerous, it's me, she said. You keep talking behind my back, you'll find out just how much. The men froze, then walked away without another word. She stood there for a long time, the night pressing down on her shoulders. Inside, Garrett was sitting by the fire, his boots off, fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee. You don't sleep much, he said as she entered. Neither do you. He looked into the flames. You want this place to survive, you'll need more than threats and pride. I've got more. I hope so. She sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a cup that wasn't warm enough. Why'd you really agree to this? She asked. Garrett didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, like it might offer something he lost long ago. Because I've spent too long with nothing, and when you've got nothing, even a lie of a home feels better than the truth. Evelyn didn't reply. There was nothing to say. But that night, for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel entirely alone. The night was unusually quiet, too quiet for a stretch of open land that normally creaked and sighed with the sounds of wind and livestock. Evelyn sat on the porch of the ranch house, her legs tucked beneath her, staring into the dark beyond the barn. The lantern beside her guttered slightly with each lazy breath of breeze, but the shadows didn't move. She hadn't seen a single rider pass on the ridge trail in days, and the usual hoot of owls or rustle of possums was strangely absent. She sipped from a cup of coffee gone bitter and cold. Inside, the floor creaked. Garrett emerged, his steps slow but deliberate, boots thudding on the wooden boards before he leaned against the porch post. You smell that? He said, after a long pause. Evelyn blinked. Smell what? He tilted his head. Nothing. That's the problem. She looked down at her cup. You always? This paranoid? Only when I'm alive. She allowed a tight smile, just for a second. Then it vanished. 3 days earlier, one of the smaller herds hadn't returned to the north paddock. The ranch hands blamed coyotes, maybe a broken fence. Evelyn had ridden out herself, tracing the trail along the stream bed that wound behind the ridge, but found nothing. No bones, no broken rails, not even hoof prints. 27 head, gone without a trace. And that was just the beginning. A day after that, the wheel on the buckboard mysteriously snapped on the way into town. A clean break, splintered too straight to be wear and tear. That evening, the corral gate was found unlatched. 2 horses missing. One returned with blood on its flank and eyes wide with terror. Garrett had stitched it up silently, no questions asked. Now the silence was louder than the wind ever could be. Garrett crouched beside the porch steps, picking up a small clump of dirt, letting it crumble through his fingers. You ever been tracked before? He asked. I've been watched, she answered. Same thing, just slower. She watched him from the corner of her eye. You think someone's watching us? I think someone's testing us. That night, she didn't sleep. She paced the floor with her shotgun resting in her arms, waiting for something to move, something to scream. But the night passed, as quiet as death. When the sun cracked over the horizon, it did so through a haze of dust and dread. Garrett left at first light, riding out alone to survey the outer fence line. Evelyn busied herself with the books. The ledger was worse than she remembered. Feed costs were up, tools needed replacing. There wasn't enough coin to hire more men, and the ones she had were growing restless. The pages blurred in front of her, numbers dancing like gnats. She slammed it shut and went out to the barn. 2 of the hands were loading crates. Clay was one of them. The other, a lanky boy named Rory, avoided her eyes. "Where you 2 going?" she asked, voice hard. Clay wiped sweat from his brow and leaned on the cart. "Rory's uncle's got a place east of here. Needs help with calving. I figure we'll head that way." "You figure," she echoed. He nodded. "Not meanin' disrespect, Miss Harper, but this place ain't safe no more. Something ain't right." "You got spooked by some missing cows and a broken wheel?" Clay met her eyes now. "Ain't just that. You married a stranger, brought in a man no one knows. Since then, bad things been happening. Might be coincidence. Might be karma. Karma for what? He shrugged. You figure that part. Rory jumped into the saddle without a word. Clay climbed up behind the reins and tipped his hat. Best of luck to you, ma'am. She stood there, lips pressed tight, watching the wagon disappear in a cloud of dust. By the time Garrett returned, the sun was halfway across the sky, and Evelyn's mood had darkened with it. He rode in slow, horse lathered, and flanks heaving. He slid down, walked past her without a word, and unsaddled the animal. She followed. You find anything? She asked. He tossed the saddle onto the rail. Yeah, I found where they cut the fence near the old mining wash. Clean slice, done with wire cutters. How many gone? Hard to tell. Maybe 15 head. Maybe more. Prints say they were herded, not scattered. She gritted her teeth. Rustlers? Could be. Could be. Garrett turned. Or it could be deliberate. Same thing. He shook his head. Rustlers steal to sell. These ones? They're making you bleed slow. Her stomach nodded. Why? Ask yourself who wants this land bad enough to drive you off. She stared at him, her face pale. You think it's Thorne? I think Thorne ain't got the spine, but someone behind him might. Cattle Baron? Garrett nodded once. Maybe. Maybe not. But whoever it is, they're organized. Later that evening, Evelyn stood by the edge of the field, staring out across the dying light. The cattle that remained looked small from this far away, scattered like punctuation across the land. Garrett walked up beside her, silent as ever. She didn't look at him. I don't know how to fix this, she said finally. You're not supposed to know, he said. You're supposed to survive it. I shouldn't have brought you here. You didn't bring me. I walked in. Same difference. Garrett tilted his head. You regret it? I regret that it's come to this. That I have to stand beside a man I barely know just to keep my name on dirt my father died on. You know me more than you think, he said. She looked at him, eyes searching. Do I? He stared back, the quiet in him thicker than the dusk around them. I was married once, he said. She blinked. You? He nodded slowly. 10 years ago, before the war. She died of fever before I ever picked up a rifle. Evelyn said nothing. Garrett's voice was barely a whisper now. I haven't spoken her name in 5 years. I forgot the sound of it. Forgot the way she laughed. He looked away. You ain't the only one fighting ghosts. That night, the barn lanterns were snuffed out early. Evelyn stood watch from the porch, rifle across her lap, heart hammering against ribs too small to hold it. At midnight, something moved out by the tree line. A flicker of motion. She stood, lifted the rifle, but held her breath. Then a sound, soft and fast, rushed toward the house. Hooves. 2 riders, maybe 3, racing past the fence line, their silhouettes just shadows against the rising moon. Garrett burst from the side of the house, rifle in hand, eyes already tracking. They disappeared into the trees before either of them fired. The next morning, the south gate was broken. One of the calves lay dead in the creek, its throat cut. Evelyn leaned against the rail, breathing through her teeth. They're not trying to steal, she whispered. No, Garrett said beside her. They're sending a message. Evelyn gripped the rail tighter, knuckles white. Then maybe it's time we send one back. Garrett didn't smile, but his eyes narrowed with something close to approval. That afternoon they rode out together, tracing the trail the riders had taken. Garrett stopped often, scanning the ground, pointing out boot prints, broken branches. At one point he crouched by a burned-out stump and found a cigar butt. Still damp, still warm. They were close, but whoever was watching had gone deeper than expected. They vanished, like ghosts, leaving only the weight of their threat behind. That night, Evelyn and Garrett sat across from each other in the dining room. No candles, no fire, just the quiet clink of spoons against metal bowls. The silence stretched. Evelyn finally said, If I asked you to kill a man for this land, would you? Garrett didn't blink. Depends. On what? On whether you're asking out of fear or out of vengeance. She stared into her soup, then pushed it away. I'm asking out of principle. Then you'll never need to ask. Evelyn stood, walking to the window. The night was still, but she no longer trusted its calm. They're not going to stop. No, Garrett said. They're not. Then we need to find out who they are. And then? Then we show them the kind of woman who doesn't run. Garrett finished his soup, stood, and walked to the door. Before stepping out into the dark, he said quietly, "Then you'd best be ready to fire first." The sky cracked open just after sundown. Thunder rolled in from the western hills like drums of war, low and steady, shaking the loose panes of the bunkhouse windows. Garrett stood in the barn doorway, arms crossed, watching the storm crawl over the plains. Lightning flashed behind the ridge, splitting the clouds into jagged streaks of white. Rain had not yet fallen, but the smell of it clung thick in the air. Inside the ranch house, Evelyn moved with tight shoulders, her boots echoing sharp across the hardwood floor. She had barely eaten all day, too consumed by the fire growing in her chest, a wildfire of worry, anger, and a cold sense of inevitability. She was down to 4 hands, 5 if she counted Garrett, and none of them were speaking much anymore. Everyone felt it, the tightening, the coil winding back for a strike. A day earlier, they'd found another fence torn, this time at the edge of the dry creek bed. 3 steers gone, no tracks this time, no blood. Just gone. Garrett had spent the better part of the morning riding a perimeter, setting traps in the tall grass like a soldier preparing for siege. Evelyn had posted herself in the tower loft above the barn, glass in hand, scanning the hills for movement. There'd been nothing, but both of them knew something was coming. It came with the second crack of thunder. Garrett heard it first, a faint tremble in the earth, the distant thud of hooves. Not one, but many. He turned sharply, stepping out into the open, just as the horizon lit up with fire. 3 torches, burning along the ridgeline, held high by riders who emerged like ghosts out of the rising storm. One rider gave a long, shrill whistle that echoed across the fields. Then came the charge. Garrett shouted toward the house, already running. "Evelyn!" She was at the window. When she saw the flames, her heart stopped. Then it kicked to life. She grabbed the rifle from the rack, slung the bandolier over her shoulder, and ran for the door. Outside, the air was electric. The first drops of rain fell just as the riders reached the lower pasture. 5 of them, maybe 6. Faces masked, coats black, horses lathered and wild. One tossed a lantern into a pile of hay near the fence line. It burst into flame, bright as a warning shot. Garrett met her at the edge of the porch, already checking the sight on his rifle. "Where's Ben and Curtis?" she shouted over the wind. "Bunkhouse. I told him to grab arms and stay low." "Do you recognize them?" she asked, scanning the riders. He didn't answer. The fire spread fast. The wind whipped it sideways across the fence line, licking up toward the wooden shed. Evelyn ran toward it, yanking open the water pump and dragging a barrel beneath the stream, her arms shaking with the effort. Garrett took position behind the stack of lumber, rifle steady, breath even. He waited. One rider peeled off from the group and aimed a shot at the barn roof. The bullet snapped through the air. Evelyn dropped the water barrel and dove behind the trough. Garrett returned fire. One clean shot that clipped the rider's shoulder and sent him reeling off his horse. The man didn't move. The others spread out, circling like wolves. Curtis emerged from the bunkhouse with a shotgun, face pale. Ben followed, dragging an old scattergun with one good barrel. "Hold fire," Garrett growled. "Let 'em come close." "They're gonna burn the whole damn place down," Curtis cried. "Not if we outlast 'em." The attackers circled again, calling out curses and threats. One of them shouted Evelyn's name. "Come out and sign it over, Miss Harper," he yelled. "You can still walk away with your hide intact." Evelyn stood from behind the trough, rifle raised. "You want this land? You come take it yourself," the man laughed. "That can be arranged." Garrett stepped beside her, voice low. "They're testing you. They want to know how far you'll go." "I'll show them." 2 riders charged then, full tilt toward the front of the house. Curtis fired first, missed wide. Garrett stepped forward and squeezed the trigger once. One rider fell, horse skidding. Evelyn fired at the second, caught his leg. The horse bucked, and he flew forward, hitting the dirt hard. Then it was chaos. Thunder overhead, rain pouring sideways, gunfire popping in every direction. Ben was hit in the leg and dragged himself back behind the trough. The smell of smoke mixed with rain and blood. Garrett moved like a shadow, cutting through the storm with purpose, always 3 steps ahead. Every shot counted. Evelyn followed him around the barn, circling to cut off the last 2 riders. One of them spotted her and turned, galloping straight for her with a lasso swinging wide. Her pulse surged. She aimed, fired, missed. The man shouted and hurled the rope. It caught her arm. She was yanked off her feet, dragged several yards through the wet grass before the horse veered. Garrett came out of nowhere. 1 clean shot. The horse reared. The rope went slack. Evelyn scrambled free, coughing and wet and furious. She picked up her rifle with shaking hands. "I had him," she snapped. "I know," Garrett said, already turning. Only one attacker remained, holding a torch and laughing as he set the north hay shed alight. Evelyn ran straight toward him. "Evelyn!" Garrett shouted, but she didn't stop. She raised her rifle, closed one eye, and squeezed the trigger. The flame died with the man. The rain finally came in full then, pounding down hard enough to drown the fire and wash blood into the soil. Smoke curled into the storm, rising from the singed barnwood and the heap of broken riders. The surviving attacker, one of the first hit, crawled toward his horse, trailing blood. Garrett stopped him with a boot to the back. "Names," he said, voice cold. The man spit blood. "We were paid." "By who?" The man laughed. "You're dead already, all of you." Garrett pressed the rifle barrel into the back of the man's neck. "Who paid you?" "Name's Decker," he whispered. "Decker, from Twin Rock." Evelyn heard it from the porch, her face hard as the rifle in her grip. They tied the man and left him in the barn under watch. Curtis patched Ben's leg as best he could. The dead were dragged to the far paddock and covered with tarps. By morning, the rain had stopped, and the ranch was quiet again, but different. Everything had shifted. Nothing felt the same. Inside the kitchen, Evelyn sat at the table, hands wrapped around a hot mug. Her knuckles were scraped, her cheek bruised. Garrett leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You all right?" he asked. She looked up. "I will be." "You saved the ranch." "We saved it." Garrett nodded. He stepped forward, pulled a crumpled paper from his coat. A wanted poster. On it, the name, Marcus Decker. Below, the words, "Wanted for land fraud, racketeering, and murder." "He's been doing this for years," Garrett said. "Buying off lawmen, sending gangs to scare folks off their land. Why us? Because your ranch sits at the head of the valley. Control this land. You control everything that runs through it." Evelyn stared at the paper, then back up at him. "We go after him." Garrett's expression didn't change. "You sure?" "He came to take everything I had. Now I'm going to take everything he is." Garrett stared for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds. The land, scorched and soaked, steamed in the morning light. Smoke still lingered, but it rose like ghosts leaving the earth. Evelyn stepped out onto the porch, boots wet, hair tangled, rifle in hand. She didn't feel scared anymore. She felt ready. The morning after the storm didn't feel like victory. It felt like aftermath. The smell of smoke still clung to the barn walls, and the soil carried the stench of blood where rain hadn't washed it clean. But the silence had changed. It no longer hung like a threat. It rested like a breath just released, as if the land itself had exhaled. Evelyn Harper walked the pasture alone, rifle slung on her shoulder, though she no longer expected danger. Her steps were slower than usual, deliberate. The wind ran fingers through her hair and tugged at the hem of her coat as she stopped beside the fence line and looked out over the grazing cattle. what was left of them. Some had returned overnight, spooked but alive. Others never would. But there was still enough. Enough to keep going. Enough to prove she hadn't been beaten. Behind her, the ranch house stood upright, scarred, but whole. Smoke still curled from the kitchen chimney. Garrett had lit a fire at dawn, and hadn't said a word since. He hadn't needed to. She leaned on the fence, watching the steer's nose through the grass. The calf lifted its head to look at her, blinked, then went back to chewing. It should have felt like peace, but it didn't. Not yet. Later, in the kitchen, Garrett poured 2 mugs of coffee and slid one across the table. Evelyn sat without a word. Her hands were scratched. Her lip had split during the fight, and now was a dark scab across her otherwise determined face. Garrett sat across from her and pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat. "What's that?" she asked, voice quiet. "Letter from an old friend. U.S. Marshal in Santa Fe. Said Decker's been on their list a long while. Slippery. Rich enough to buy his way into circles most men can't touch." Evelyn studied him. "But not untouchable." "No," Garrett said. "Not anymore. You exposed him. He'll come back. Not after what happened here. Not when there's witnesses. He can't afford another failure." Evelyn leaned back. "Then we ride to Twin Rock." Garrett didn't blink. "No need. The marshal's coming here next week. Wants a full statement. Will the law even believe it?" Garrett met her eyes. "You lived it. That's enough." A long pause settled between them. Not awkward, not strained, just full of things neither of them needed to say out loud anymore. They had stood together in the fire, and something about that had changed the nature of silence between them. Now it was a companion, not an enemy. "Ben's healing up," Garrett said. "Says he'll be back on his feet in a few weeks. He's a stubborn one. He learned from you." Evelyn smiled, faint but real. It warmed something in Garrett's chest he hadn't felt in years. Curtis had taken over running the barn and had rallied the remaining hands without being asked. A quiet shift had taken place. No one second-guessed her anymore, no one muttered behind her back. When she walked into the barn, men stepped aside. When she spoke, they listened. Her name, once tied to doubt, now carried weight. After breakfast, she walked the property with Garrett beside her. The land was wet and the trails soft, but the horses moved easy under saddle. The sun broke through mid-morning, and with it came birdsong, soft and cautious. They rode past the ridge where the first fires had started, past the creek bed where the first body had fallen, and through the scorched remains of the hayshed. "I'm gonna rebuild it," she said, nodding to the ruins. "You should." "With stone this time," Garrett nodded. "Might last longer." They stopped at the northern paddock and dismounted. Evelyn crouched near the edge of the fence, picking up a piece of charred wood. "Funny," she said, turning it in her hand, "how fire eats what it can but leaves the bones." Garrett stood beside her, watching her quietly. "Everything that matters survived," he said. "Barely. Barely still counts." They walked back in silence. When they reached the house, she stopped him before he could turn toward the bunkhouse. "You don't have to sleep out there anymore," she said. He met her eyes, unreadable as ever. "Not unless you want to." Garrett held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded. "All right." She didn't move. Her fingers brushed his as she turned, and he let them linger. Just enough to feel real. That night, the fire in the hearth burned low and slow. Evelyn sat in her father's old chair, staring at the flames, a quilt draped across her knees. Garrett stood nearby, sipping from a chipped mug, watching her more than the fire. "You ever think about what's next?" she asked. He tilted his head. "Next? After all this? After Decker? After the land's safe?" He looked down at the floor, then back at her. "I don't think like that." "Why not?" "Because people like me don't get next. We get now if we're lucky." She reached for her mug, took a sip. "You got now, and you earned next." He didn't answer. The wind tapped against the windows. Somewhere outside, an owl called. The land had quieted again, but not forgotten. Garrett moved toward the fire, crouched beside it, poked the coals with a stick until they flared back to life. "I didn't think I'd still be alive by this age," he said softly. "Didn't think I'd want to be." Evelyn turned to him, her voice just above a whisper. "What changed?" He looked up at her. "You." She didn't blink. "I don't know what to do with that," she said. He gave a small smile. "You don't have to do anything." In the days that followed, the ranch began to breathe again. The men repaired fences without being asked. The cattle settled. The chickens resumed their wandering paths through the yard. Evelyn wrote letters by lamplight, one to the marshal, another to the banker in town, informing him that she wouldn't be selling after all. Her handwriting was firm, deliberate, each word a nail driven into a new foundation. Garrett built a small tower on the ridge, a watchpost with a clear view in all directions. He spent an hour each evening up there, just watching. No one questioned it. It made them feel safer. It made her feel safer. One morning, she found him standing on the porch, staring at the hills. "You still expect them to come back?" she asked. He shook his head. "No." "Then why the lookout?" "Because it reminds me what we fought for." She stepped beside him, followed his gaze. "You know," she said, "I was so sure I'd have to do this alone. For years, I thought strength meant silence. I thought it meant not needing anyone. It doesn't. No, it means standing when you don't want to, and letting someone stand with you when you can't." He looked at her. She met his eyes. There was no rush in the moment, no need to name what had been built between them. It simply was. That afternoon, the marshal arrived, dust on his coat, badge shining. He shook Evelyn's hand, then Garrett's. They sat at the kitchen table, told the story from start to finish. The marshal took notes, nodded, didn't interrupt much. When it was over, he leaned back in his chair. "I believe you," he said. "I'll see to it Decker faces a court. Might take time, but this was the break we needed." Evelyn didn't smile. She just exhaled. Garrett showed him the ridge before he left, pointed out the trail Decker's men had used. The marshal tipped his hat before riding off, promising to return when the time came. That night, Evelyn stood on the porch again. This time, the air was calm. The moon hung heavy and full, casting silver light across the fields. Garrett joined her without a word. "Tomorrow," she said, "we start digging the foundation for the new shed. I'll get the tools ready. Then I want to start expanding the herd before winter. Might ride north, talk to the Wilkins Ranch." "I'll ride with you." She looked at him. "You planning on staying?" He nodded once. "For good?" "For as long as you'll have me." She stepped closer, her voice quieter now. "Then I guess we should talk about what we really are." Garrett smiled, slow and steady. "I think we already know." She reached out and took his hand. He didn't pull away. The wind stirred the grass. The porch boards creaked beneath their boots. Somewhere in the distance, a newborn calf bleated, and a horse snorted in its stall. The ranch had survived. And so had they. In a world where land was power and survival meant standing your ground, Evelyn Harper proved that resilience isn't born from the absence of fear, but from the decision to fight anyway. And in Garrett Boone, she didn't just find a name on paper. She found a partner, a protector, and a love forged in fire. Together, they didn't just save a ranch. They built a future neither of them dared to hope for. If this story stirred your heart and left you wanting more, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, where courage meets romance under the open skies. Saddle up. There's always another unforgettable tale waiting just over the next ridge.